welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Turn the Page. I am your host, Jen, and I am joined by the writer of an absolutely beautiful memoir. It is full of so much resilience and honesty and really beautiful writing and eloquence, and I am just so grateful for the opportunity to talk about it. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Paul Rousseau. I'm a disabled writer and author of the book Friendly Fire, a Fractured Memoir. And it was recently published by HarperCollins, the imprint Harper Horizon.
Mm. It is such a beautiful book, and I'd love if we could start just by talking a little bit about, it is a remarkable story, and it's told with so much, as I said, honesty and grace and a lot of humor too.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm curious about what compelled you to write the story down. Was it part of your process of healing and recovery? So could you just tell us a little bit about, how what led you to the book?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like I never snapped and made a conscious decision to write this thing. You find out in the book that I had wanted to be kind of a writer all along. And I was in my undergrad to become a writer. Fiction obviously was my priority and what I expected to later go into, perhaps some sort of, advanced degree. And then, of course, 2 months before college graduation, I got shot in the head. So then that just sort of automatically became my focus. Like even in the hospital, the nurses were handing me, journals. My mom had told them, he's a writer, and they're just like, okay, well then I'll provide him with some sort of comfort. And I started drafting this thing seriously 2 weeks after I had gotten shot. So it just sort of like I said, I like to say that this book was written in my bones. Like I had no choice but to write it. It was just a complete reactionary, compulsive thing.
That makes total sense, and I think that the structure that it takes really reflects not just that process, but the event itself and what
Yeah.
healing from a trauma means. So, could you talk a little bit about the fractured part of the title?
Yeah,
It's great and it means so many different things. So,
it
could you
does.
talk about maybe like how that talks about like the structure and the experience itself?
Yeah, so they were always this sort of really symbiotic thing, which I'm really thankful for. You mentioned this fractured element means so many things, like you said. It's like the fracture of my friendship, because obviously the person who shot me unintentionally was my best friend and roommate at the time. So there's this fractured friendship. The fracture implies the injury itself was that the bullet hit my skull and fractured my bone, my skull into my brain. There's the fracture of my life at that moment, from before and after forever, this sort of this grand event that will forever fracture and separate my life. And then the actual book itself, it's these little mosaic chapters. They're very, very short, the shortest being probably a paragraph. The longest, I think, is an extreme outlier at maybe like 7 pages, which is still very quick. I think it's fair to say. And they're just these little pockets of energy. And the idea is that, especially in part one, they jump around through time. And that's for a few reasons too. One is that my agent and I thought that it'd be really difficult to read all of the shooting in one straight go. It's probably, I think, like 30 chapters, and it weighs on you if you don't break it up in some way. It's very dark, and like you said, I put a lot of levity in it. That's just my natural reaction to things, but still, the content is very dark. So we needed to break it up. And by doing so, we added bits of pieces of my past, just like speculating things, some sort of tangentially related thematic thing to perhaps what I was discussing, advancing like the threat of the shooting. I might bring up basketball, and then I'll talk about how, during before my parents divorced, we used to watch the Pistons play in the NBA Finals. So that's sort of the fractured format of the book.
Mm. Yeah, I'm really taken with that idea that, breaking it up makes it a little bit easier to read because it would be
Yeah.
the counter all at once. Does that also at play in the writing of it? Like, did you sit down and write all that at once, or did you also sort of break it up to sort, to for easier
Hmm.
processing?
Yeah, the most of the book I did write in spurts, and that was due to mostly my brain injury. It's just easier for me to focus in those little spurts. I would like make how to like handwrite notes throughout the week, and then on the weekends I would just pump it out in like these little like writing sessions throughout the day. So a lot of the part one was written by hand during like my office job that I had for a little while, which is kind of funny. But yeah, and then interestingly enough, as I mentioned, I started writing the book two weeks after I'd gotten shot. So I just got back home from the hospital and I had all these police reports on my bed. And I was pretty dissociated in that state still. I still sort of thought of what happened to have happened to a third person, not myself. And I could see all these things that had happened to me, like a movie. And I basically was just like transcribing them. So I wrote all the whole chapters very quickly in very long sessions. That's the only part of the book that I didn't write sort of fractured, but then I sort of artificially fractured it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because, you talk a little bit about too about, trauma and memory and how,
Hmm.
your memory of everything that happened that day after that point is so clear, but that you had lost sort of the day before,
Yes.
to it too. Did you find that writing the book and assembling these memories had like a therapeutic value to you as well?
Yeah, I think it's unavoidable to sort of pair writing with therapy because they just activate a lot of the same things in the brain. But I definitely, that wasn't my primary goal.
Mhm.
I wanted to write something literary primarily. Like I was like, I want to create a literary work of art about what happened to me. And I obviously write about therapy too. So like, again, these things are just so connected. And I found that EMDR, which is like this PTSD therapy that's sort of not totally uncommon, but just a little weird, I guess you could say. It's just like a strange thing. It's like a total recall machine, you know? It's like this very strange feeling. That actually added a ton of perspective to me in the book, and I went back and like really beefed up these moments that I now had like this time had passed and this perspective had been added. And I would say therapy, in fact, helped the book more than the other way around. Like going to speaking to someone, you just like I'd have all these eureka moments, and I would go back after talk therapy and go like, "Oh my God, I have all this material now I can add." So I
Mm.
found that very helpful. So I recommend that. It's like a little workshop. If you're a writer out there, definitely go to therapy.
That's great advice, I think, for writers and everybody.
Yes, I think so too.
And you're right that it does feel very literary because it has like the very strong through line of like a year of recovery, basically.
Hmm.
But you also bring in so many other threads, like
Yeah.
the bureaucratic failures that sort of like were revealed by the incident, the policy
Hmm.
failures, and like how this country treats gun and
Yeah.
ownership and reform. So what was it like weaving all that together? And did that process alter your feelings about what had happened to you, if that makes sense, or did it inflect your feelings about what happened?
Yeah, if anything, there were moments where I was writing too close to what had happened and I was writing it too angry. I
Mhm.
think that was the main thing we had to sort of step back from. Like the very first draft of this book. So if you think about it, like it's a 4 year span plus a lot of like my past. This is kind of like the scope of the book. I had a first draft about a year later, like so in 2018. So clearly, like my first draft had little to nothing to do with these sort of, litigation things that had happened yet. And so it was just very like it was just too close, just too messy, too, like just somebody trying to like frenetically journal their, life down. I needed to take time and I needed the distance and to perhaps let therapy do its thing, do the work so that I could, think on the page more clearly and not just sort of vent on the page.
Mhm.
So yeah, I did, and then in tangent, like that did help me sort of again, like this therapy, this work. I'm in a better place now than I think I would be without these two things helping me.
Wow. I'd love if we could talk a little bit about the through line of sort of processing a betrayal, because I
Hmm.
think like our culture and literature is replete with stories about like romantic betrayal,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really talk a lot about friendship betrayal and what processing that is like.
Mhm.
So is that another process that sort of changed your feelings about your relationships and your attachments and stuff like that?
Yeah. So originally, I actually didn't, the friendship element of the book, I really wanted to be the main thread. And when I sat down to write it, I wanted it to be like, oh, how tragic that us, such great friends, our friendship had to, sort of dissipate because of this shocking event. And if you read the book, you'll find out that that's not how the friendship thread goes. I sat down to write it, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait, here's a toxic trait, here's a red flag, here's this and that. And that's the thing about writing. It's just like you just never know what your brain wants to say. Writing is definitely a constant state of discovery for me. I like to write into like the inexplicable and just like see what pops out. And even with nonfiction that happened, I had, it's just like kind of a fascinating thing that something I knew subconsciously but didn't know, up front, just sort of spilled out. And these letters, I had them as letters first. These letters to Mark. Mark is the pseudonym of the guy who shot me. I had all of like our backstory as like a long letter to him, and that got edited a little bit. But they were like they did not turn out the way I expected them to. They were very, I don't even know, just aware all of a sudden of like this. I mean, toxic masculinity is that's what our friendship ended up being. And I think that made its way into the book unbeknownst to me at the time.
Mm. That's a really interesting sort of parallel between like the creative drafting process, and how emotional
Hmm.
processing works because there's
Yeah.
like, primary emotions and then secondary emotions and like that sort of can translate to drafting and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So something I think that is like really remarkable about the book itself is that, it's such an eloquent and moving description of like the aftermath of a traumatic brain injury. And it's like
Hmm.
its eloquence is a testimony to your recovery and the you have done.
Thank
And
you.
you're welcome. And I'm curious about like what were the things, were there extra things that you did to like take care of yourself throughout the writing process? To make I'm sure it was like physically as well as emotionally
Oh,
tiring. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, yeah. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, recently, she would be the
Congratulations.
first. Thank you so much. Yeah, we just got back from our honeymoon, so I'm tired for that reason now too, but that's okay. Um, she would be the first to tell you that she does not like book Paul. Like writer Paul is someone she was not a fan of. I for whatever reason, post injury just obsess over like I guess you could say just like perfection, but just I obsess over topics very easily, and whether that be a symptom of a TBI, which I think it sort of is in a way because you when you have a TBI like repetition, you don't like repetition, or at least I didn't like repetition, especially of like unwanted sounds and stimulus. And so then you just like fixate on things to sort of, block yourself out from those external stimuli. But my book then became like a soul focus and like a soul endeavor. And on those weekends where it was time to draft, I mean, this was like a 10-hour day for me. And so it was, we were in an apartment at the time and it was just, all the blinds down, me in the corner, just typing away. And that was my life for like 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
So I was not very kind to both her and my body, most likely. But I just don't know if I could have done it any other way. I don't know if, I mean, I certainly when the editing process came, I had learned how to more appropriately work. And that was also with the help of my agent. She looks out for me a lot. She knows I have these like tendencies to like to work fast and to work as much as I can tolerate. And so
Mhm.
she sort of tells me, hey, just like don't rush and space things out.
Nice. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah.
It's good now. I figured it out now.
Yeah.
But during the drafting process, things were not great.
Yeah. Well, that I think is, parallels with like another great quality of the book is that it's very honest about like
Yeah.
the emotional messiness, let's say,
Oh yeah.
like processing a trauma and how it impacts your relationships. And it creates like you do a very good job of like, how do I put it? Describing like like little emotional conflicts, but also
Hmm.
like the deep well of support that you also got from like some key relationships too. And yeah, like how did you approach like writing about like these, most important relationships in a person's life,
Yeah, I mean, I am so stupidly lucky that like, I think I mentioned this in the book, like Anna could have just like totally thrown her hands up during any portion of this. This definitely was traumatizing to her too. She was one of the first people to sort of see me post shooting in this gurney going down the elevator, as there's this mob of law enforcement and things behind me. Just a totally traumatic thing. And those key relationships, her, my mom, my close family, they only got strengthened through this, and it very easily could have gone the other way. And to my knowledge, even like the roommate who had eventually helped me, who came to the apartment and helped me, in his relationship at the time, I think even they are married now too. And so it's just nice to know that they stuck together too, and that these key, of course, the friendship between the three of us, may have ruptured, but like our ancillary relationships, I think, got strengthened through it.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of empathy in the book, like for, others, the people in your life, and also for yourself, I think, and like the process of recovery. Um,
Yeah,
it's very like emotionally vulnerable in a way, and I think it's just communicated so, yeah, so beautifully. Like, thank you so
thank
much for
you.
just giving us this book.
That means a lot, really. It's like you never know what to expect when you put something out there. This is my debut, of my first big work in the world, and so that's just so touching to hear that it's doing something like that. It's nice to know.
Do you think that you will return to writing? Like specifically, up at the top of this, you mentioned that you had wanted to write fiction. Do you think you'll ever
Hmm.
write fiction too?
Yeah, so I write short stories throughout the writing my memoir. I continue to write and publish short stories as well. And when I do that, I lean. You might have noticed in Friendly Fire, I sort of try to put as much like speculative things in there. There's like the trauma is like referred to as like the ghost of April 7, which is the date this happened. And so like as many times as I can add paranormal things, horror adjacent things, that's where my fiction leans, and it's often similar to Friendly Fire in that it's the stories are on the shorter side of things.
Mm.
There's this thing called Flash, which is great in this day and age where we don't have maybe a lot of time to read. The stories are all under 1,000 words, and there's a big community on the internet of Flash writers, and there's all these great literary magazines that publish Flash exclusively, or at least mostly. And it's just fun to write. It's fun to sit down and just try to crack out 1,000 word story about ghosts or something funny like that. I love it. And I'm thankful to have a little bit of a collection now. I think I have about 30,000 words
Wow.
of these stories. But yeah, I want to do a long form one, of course, maybe even akin to Friendly Fire, where the chapters are short still. That
Mm.
just seems to be my mode that I work best in. Sort of long form scares me, but if it's chopped up, I think I can sort of handle it better. And so I've been really thinking about what my obsessions are now and how I can turn that into sort of maybe a novel or, some just more short stories that I've been working on.
Nice. I think horror is a like the perfect genre for Flash because it gives it
Me
like a
too.
sort of like this. You might hear this around a campfire, like
Oh
it.
God, yeah. Yeah, it's very oral, especially like you have to really focus on word choice and what a cool way to like in that moment when you have to condense, if you sort of focus on like the sound of the words, you can just do a lot of really unique things. I'm thankful to have won some awards for my flash fiction, and I think like the auditory sound of it coming out of someone's mouth is definitely something I've focused on.
Oh, nice. Well, I'm definitely going to be checking out your Flash fiction as
Well,
well.
thank you.
And thank you again just for coming to the show. It's been like a real delight to get to talk to you about this book. Thank you.
You as well. I really appreciate it.
Okay, listeners, now it's on you. Please check out Friendly Fire, A Fractured Memoir. It's an absolutely gorgeous book. And I think before we started recording, I said it's very nourishing. And I'm just going to say that for you all here, too. It's a very good read. All right, it is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.